Hi, this is Neil. I should look at least a little familiar to you. It's the third time, maybe second or fourth, depending on how this unfolds, that you've seen me. I want to talk about the apology. I've assigned it, or will soon assign it in your class. You should have three items. One of them is called Socrates and Plato, the Euthyphro, Apology, and Crito. It's a one-page, one-side introduction to uh, the relationship between Socrates and Plato, a little bit about Socrates, a little bit about Plato. Um, Secondly, you should have a summary of the apology. It's about 2 or 3 pages, depending, and that will go line by line or paragraph by paragraph to help you understand the apology when you read it. The apology is difficult. It's not very long. It's 20 or 21 pages, but it it can feel very repetitive and circular. And so, if you read this, if you read my summary of it as you're reading the actual apology, it should be helpful. So you have a piece called Socrates and Plato. You have a piece called Summary of the Apology, and the third thing you have is something that's called Introduction to Philosophy, some notes, and Socrates and the Apology. And that third item is what I want to look at. The opening question of that third item um, is the question: why are we reading the Apology? It's essentially 2,400 years old. It was written in somewhere around 400 BCE, before the Common Era, and it's just a long time ago. What was around at the time the Apology was written, and at the time that Socrates and Plato were alive, what was around was kind of literally nothing that we have today. There was no electricity, there were no engines, there were no elaborate homes. I mean, it's an entirely different world, and so you know, what could the apology, or what could Socrates and Plato have to say to us 2,400 or so years later? The way I want to explain that at this point is that to get right to the point with a very large generalization, but I think it's accurate. Plato, who wrote the Apology, is the foundation of Western civilization. Plato and Socrates together are certainly the foundation of Western civilization, which is to say that without Plato and without Socrates, we would not be who we are. We would just not be around, quite likely. And so we read Plato and we read about Socrates because it's reading about ourselves. It's our history. History is us, and our origins are us. We know that as individuals. We are frequently thinking about our family and where we grew up and when we grew up and what happened to us and how the events in our individual singular lives is related to the adults that we've become. And the same can kind of be said, I mean, certainly can be said about our culture and about our civilization. That we, as a whole, we as a civilization have a history and an origin, and that history is us. And so when we look to understand ourselves, we are looking to understand and to learn about our history. And I want to make the point, just to be clear here, that it's not like we're reading something in the distant history which has no relation to us except for some, strange and forced self knowledge. Our history really is the path to us, and we can point out specific aspects of our lives that are related to um, our the origin of our culture and our civilization in our history, and the origin of that civilization. I mean, the self-conscious origin of who we are, the ones who first asked the questions, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be us? Was really Socrates and Plato and contemporaries and just preceding historical figures, and so when we read something like the Apology that is written 2,400 years ago, why do we read it? It's because it is us. It's still relevant. And one of the points I want to make is that Plato, and I said this a couple of minutes ago, Plato asked the fundamental questions that we are still raising about ourselves today. And what happens is that we go from Plato, who was inspired to be what he was by Socrates, his mentor. Socrates was born in 469 BCE. He was sentenced to death and executed in 399 BCE. Plato was born in 427 BCE and died in 347 BCE. And so Socrates is about 40 years older than Plato. Plato was an aristocrat. It was expected that he was going to go into politics. But he saw Socrates on the street, and Socrates was an event. Everybody, all the youth, or many of the youth, surrounded Socrates as Socrates was questioning various persons, many of them contemporaries, politicians, artists, workmen, and so on. And Plato saw Socrates question people and saw Socrates try to discover who these people were and who he himself, Socrates, was. Plato was so inspired that he decided to follow Socrates instead of going into politics, as it was expected that Plato would do as an aristocrat. Plato began to ask questions and write. And so what we have in Plato are somewhere around 26 or 30 dialogues with Socrates as the as the protagonist, and quite likely illustrating some of Plato's own ideas. But the point is that I mean, the main really overall point that I want to make here is that we go from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle. And Aristotle was a student at Plato's academy. Plato's academy was the first formal school of higher education. It was opened maybe sometime around 385 BCE, and Aristotle was a student there, and Aristotle was inspired to go into this sort of new career, if you want, called the philosopher. And what you have in about 130-year period from Socrates through Plato to Aristotle's death in 322 BCE, what you have is this remarkable set of three geniuses who found Western civilization. And it is not too much to say, and I said as much several minutes ago, that without Socrates, without Plato, and without Aristotle, we would not be who we are as a culture today. And one of the reasons that I can say that is that Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle were Greeks, and Greece was the foundation of the Western world, just as in our world today, English is kind of the spoken language of world business. many civilizations just in order to do business, in order to read academic journals, in order to do accounting and other, weather and so on. Much of the language that is spoken is English. It is English. It's not English, it's English. And as this is true of English today, it was true of Greek in from Socrates' time forward. And so what you've got is much of the ancient world speaking Greek, and why that is relevant, the way that is transported to us, is actually in the ancient world when Christ was born and raised, the language that was spoken was Greek. So that the New Testament is actually written in a form of Greek. And that Greek has its origin ultimately in Socratic and Platonic and Aristotelian Greek. So the one of the foundational books of Western civilization, one of the foundational figures, whether you believe in Jesus Christ or not, one of the foundational figures of Western civilization was Christ and Christianity. And Christ spoke Greek, essentially. And so we go from Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, which were the civilizers of the ancient world, to the one of the fundamental forces shaping Western society as we know it today, and that is Christianity. So the reason that it is relevant still to read something like the Apology, which is almost 2,400 years old, is because the Apology was a major work that shaped how we thought about our lives. In the Apology, we'll see Plato asks fundamental questions about who we are and how we come to develop an idea of who we are, and what a good life for us is, and what a bad life also is, and what we should not be doing. So that our the arc that we're looking at is this wide arc of the foundation of our lives today. Without, we could probably say, and the way I would explain this is, and you'll pardon me for fudging this a little bit, but I want to say that we go from Socrates and Plato through Aristotle to Christianity, and with some other forces in there, we get who we are today and the kinds of things that we think about. So this is a focus of our lives. It's not ancient history. It's the present problems that we have. It's the present issues that we have were formulated 2,400 years ago. One of the most famous comments about Plato, who wrote these works, these first several works that we're going to read, a famous comment made by an early 20th century philosopher whose name was Alfred North Whitehead, is that everything written since Plato is only a footnote to his work. We are still dealing with the problems that Plato developed. So that is why we are reading something like the Apology and a couple other works by Plato, and it's why it is still so important for us today. I hope this has been somewhat instructive, and you'll probably see me again sometime soon.